This is so exciting, and I just love the energy in the room. And I want to tell you about, first of all, 8-year-old blonde-haired Lydia. She stepped off her third grade school bus, walked on the streets of the sidewalk in East Los Angeles into this big building. Inside, she slowly turned and turned, looking at all these shelves and shelves of books, all sizes, all colors. And she stopped and thought to herself, I wonder what's in them. It must be pretty important if someone took the time to write it down. That's our public libraries, a treasure trove, open to the public. But Lydia couldn't read those books. So in 1975, there was a landmark study about adult literacy that showed we have a crisis in this country. People began talking about it. Librarians were talking about it and debating. Some wanted to get involved, and some said, no, that's not a work for a public library. We work with people who already know how to read. But others were insisting we should offer literacy services. In 1984, Gary Strong was California state librarian. He stopped talking and put some action in. He had come into a windfall, federal windfall of funds, which was a one-time funding, and he had a year to spend it. And so he put it into adult literacy programs. So that was 1984, and 27 libraries signed up to provide services that first year. The first tutor training workshop was held in the City of Commerce at the public library. Yeah. That workshop, we got some commerce supporters. That workshop was led by Linda Church, who came from the organization which is now Pro-Literacy, and she taught it. It was attended by these new library staff from around the state and by the local volunteers. I was one of those local volunteers living in the City of Commerce who was trained as a volunteer tutor in that workshop. And I look back and think, who knew what course that was going to set my life on? And who knew if that program would even exist beyond that first year? Let alone, who knew we would be here gathering 40 years later, celebrating all of the lives of adult learners that have been changed, the lives of their families, the lives of their tutors, and the library staff that work with them. So now, we started with 27 libraries. Now there's 103 public libraries in California that are part of California Library Literacy Services. So the discussion about literacy being in the public library, it hasn't gone away, but there's much less resistance, and now there's much more evidence of why it does belong in a public library. And I want to talk with you a little bit about the values that shape these CLLS, the services to be what they are. I want to talk about them in terms of the ingredients that go into the CLLS secret sauce. And the first one is that it's a library-based program. It's in a library. It's not generic. It's not just anywhere in your community. It's part of the library. The second of the 7 ingredients is that it's more than library-based. It's a core library service. It's part of the library's mission. It's part of the library's vision. It's what they do. So it's part of that vision and that mission. The third ingredient probably distinguishes it the most. It is learner-driven. Learner-driven. Let me break that down for you. Let me take you to the roots of that. Carmela Ruby worked at the State Library at that time. She's the one, I understand, who convinced Gary to put that money into adult literacy program. That's because she had just returned from working a year at the National Library of Nicaragua, where she was introduced to the work of Brazilian educator Paulo Freire. He believed literacy was for social justice, social action, community building. And Carmela saw how when you get these learners together and they learn a method of problem posing and solving their own problems instead of being passive recipients of knowledge, things change. It's pretty powerful. She wanted to see that happen in California. And that has a lot to do with how it came that Al Bennett was the first person hired to set up this program. Carmela learned that Al had been at a conference where Paulo Freire was the speaker. And during a break, Al introduced himself and told him that he had worked with the project in the Philippines. Well, Paulo wanted to know more. He invited Al to breakfast. When Carmela heard that, Al's future was sealed. She had to have him at the library. Now, Al says he wasn't as radical as Paulo, which Carmela thought he must be. And maybe not, but I can tell you he was well-versed in the theory and the practices of that set up by Paulo Freire. And he was knowledgeable and strategic in how to apply that in a public library setting in the United States. That's powerful. And then Paul was joined by Paul Kiley, who is a PR expert. He was hired to teach us how to promote our programs, how that outreach means going outside of the library walls and being in the community and being part of that. And he taught us the need to bring visible value to what we're doing, that people need to know about it. Too often libraries do things and they don't tell people. No one knows what's going on. The next state staff that was hired was Carol Talon. She had been the literacy coordinator who started the program at Contra Costa County Library. And then the state received funding to add a family literacy component to CLLS in 1988. They brought Carol on board. And she taught us that a library's family literacy program is not about teaching parents to teach their children how to read. It's about valuing and recognizing the role that parents play in preparing their children for a lifetime of reading, a lifetime of enjoyment built around books. And that's unique and special for libraries. So she taught us that, and I can tell you that kind of made libraries evolve a little bit. Up to that point, adult services served adults, children's services served children, and then here came family literacy, putting them together and doing these programs. It blurred the lines. And so libraries had to evolve, which is very special, and CLLS has helped libraries to evolve. In fact, I would say they've pretty much been a disruptor. Isn't that wonderful? They've disrupted the business as usual mentality. And most of all, in the greatest spot, that's because it's learner-driven. That was especially visible in the Bay Area when some learners, such as Enrique Ramirez, gathered. They planned and presented the first adult learner conference in the nation, planned and presented by adult learners. They were leaders. Yeah. They formed a new reader council of the Bay Area. They got into it so much, then they heard that libraries have this library legislative day, so they said, we're going. They went to Sacramento and talked to their legislators, told them what the library's done for their life, and advocated for it. A year later, they gathered on the steps of the court in San Francisco to write letters to the governor to advocate for a library budget augmentation. The library budget, not the literacy portion of it, but the full library. This is really the learners from the community connecting with the library and showing that visible value of what they do. So that's part of, too, the community needing to be involved. Another bit of the secret sauce is community. CLLS is a partnership between the state library and the local libraries. In fact, when a library receives funding, they're committed to match that with some local support, funding and other local support. If that had not been required by the state library, I don't know that we would still be here these 40 years later. It was a wise move. And that wisdom was tested and proven in the 2011-2012 fiscal year. There was a trigger amendment in the state budget, and that got pulled, and libraries received no funding from the state that year. Yet, out of 105 libraries with CLLS programs, only 5 closed their program. The rest, the remaining 100, continued without local support. So that's how it works. That's really what made it work. And that continues to be key for CLLS. And then another thing about being learner-driven, in its full expression, it's a matter of staff making space for learners to gather and to talk and discuss things and come up with plans and carry them out. One example is the Easy Voter Guide, which learners developed in the 1990s and which is still in use today and has grown beyond libraries. The public in California uses it, but that grew out of CLLS. And actually, they're still doing it. A group of learners just led that workshop on Zoom earlier this week. So it's still going on. So leading a learner-driven program is not easy. It's not common. And actually, it can be downright scary. The literacy director has to kind of share power. They have to listen, give up some control over things, and they have to learn. You know, after that Easy Voter Guide project finished, one of the learners, Rosonia Willoughby, took us to task. She said, "You teach how to check the boxes, but you're not exposing people on changing their community." And that's where people don't connect the dots with voting. Teach people how to make a change. Help people to form questions in their head. Sometimes literacy programs concentrate on the mechanics and not the depth of the issues. That went on to lead into some more projects. But also that's why it's so valuable to have that 7th ingredient for CLLS secret sauce, and that's that its staff are professionally engaged. Because, you know, we don't know the answers. We come in, we're learning along with the learners. We're problem posing, we're investigating, finding out how to do this job. And that's why it's so important we gather together in regional literacy networks, talk with our colleagues. That's why we take workshops from pro-literacy and other organizations, and from our own colleagues that have developed some training, because they're also willing to freely share what they're learning and show each other how to do it and support one another. And that's what is so important. So all these 40 years, as a field, we've been learning along with these adult learners. You know, and Rosonia said something else earlier this year that I heard her speak on a Zoom meeting. She said, "It is not a lack of reading that keeps people from changing their lives. It's a lack of confidence. It's fear that they can't do it. As learners improve confidence and self-esteem, they can more readily embrace the skills that will empower them, the leadership, communication, advocacy." And she said, now that spills over into learning how to read better and how to write and how to communicate and to accomplish any goal that's set before them. And I pair that with some wisdom I heard from Leslie Shelton, also who's here. Prior to becoming a CLLS coordinator, she had worked 8 years counseling higher education students who were struggling. And then she worked 6 years with cancer patients. Then she came to the library working in adult literacy, and she says, there's some common thread running through all of these groups. And she looked at it, she thought about it, and one day she was able to identify it. She said, learners think their minds are broken. It's not their minds, it's their hearts that are broken. And then Leslie said, that's the special strength of adult literacy being in a public library at a time in their life when they've decided to step out and ask for help. And they're so vulnerable, they come to the public library, a safe space. There's no shame. There's no judgment, they're welcomed, and they can heal. They can heal just like that little girl I told you about, Lydia, how she began to heal. You know, when she was 38 years old, she still couldn't read those books in the library, but she learned. I became her tutor in 1987, and we learned together. We grew in confidence together. And I had the honor of watching her walk across the stage, cap and gown, when she graduated from community college. Yeah. And Lydia is one of many, of so many, and that's why we're here today celebrating you who make CLLS what it is. I think you're probably the seasoning that goes in that, a dash of salt, a little pepper. Some of you bring a little red cayenne pepper to it, but you're what makes CLLS what it is. So we're celebrating you and literacy and libraries, because libraries are more than books and programs. Libraries are about every person who walks through that door. Libraries are incubators for the growth of their community members, to fuel their aspirations, to support their dreams, and build their confidence and skills so that they can go after those dreams. And so I'm proud to say congratulations, California Library Literacy Services, for 40 years of learning together and changing lives together. Thank you.